Hi there, everyone, and welcome to Paper Wishes Weekly Webisodes. I'm Sara Newman, and I'm so happy you're joining me for this episode of Saturday with Sara. Today we're playing with some new stencils and texture mediums from our friends at Creative Expressions. First, I have 4 stencils from the fabulous Jamie Rogers, and to go along, I have 5 gorgeous colors of sparkle texture paste. So as you can see, we have a lot to play with today. I have some fun projects to show you and a couple of demos too. I'm really glad you're here today, so come play with us. Let's start first with our stencils. So we have the Luscious Lilies. Just take a look at that beautiful design. There's also Dancing Dandelions. We have a Sunflower Bouquet and a Clematis Burst. Now what's cool about these stencils, and you can see here, there are 3 stencils included in each one, and they all coordinate. So there's a square, a rectangle, and then a border design. So we love stencils, and of course one thing that goes beautifully with stencils is texture paste. And we have 5 gorgeous colors of Cosmic Shimmer Sparkle Texture Paste. Now you can see one of the jars here, but I think it makes it a little easier to see with a swatch sheet. So you can see here the different colors. And here I'm just taking a palette knife and scooped out a bit of each of those texture pastes and just put them right onto my cardstock. So here are the colors. There's a Graceful Blue, Silver Moon, Antique Rose, Sea Green, and then probably my favorite and such a versatile color is the Warm Gold. Now, Sparkle Texture Paste is a dimensional paste. I'll just open up this jar and you can see here it's got glitter added to the paste. So the base is transparent and the color is in the glitter. Super easy to use and it gives a beautiful effect. So what I'm going to do is move aside all of my things here and bring in one of the stencils. Now this is the Sunflower stencil. And I just have this taped down onto a piece of white cardstock. Of course, I am using my hunky-dory low-tack tape here just to hold everything in place. So what I'll do is use some of this Graceful Blue. And I'm going to have a couple of tools on hand. I've got my palette knife on hand, and I also have my stencil pal on hand here too. And I'll show you why in just a second. So all I need to do is just scoop out some of this lovely texture medium, and you can see it's got a nice thick body to it. So I've just got this on the back of the palette knife. It's not drippy, it's not falling off. I'm going to start in the center and gently work that medium outward. Now with really detailed stencil designs, you want to be careful that you're not sort of shimmying back and forth because that can catch the palette knife onto some of those detail areas, and then you can end up with an image that's not quite so crisp. And it's kind of like frosting a cake. You're just going to scrape the medium off to the sides here. And it doesn't dry very quickly, so that does give you some nice time in here so that you can take your time with this. You don't need to rush. Okay, so you can see how easy this is. Now, I'm going to make sure to scrape off my palette knife. And here's where I'm going to use my stencil pal. So you can see I've got a flat edge on here and a curved edge up here. I'm going to grab this curved edge in my hand, and then at kind of a 45-degree angle, I'll scrape across here, just one direction, and you can see I've got a lot of extra paste on here that I can either continue working with, or I can just pop this right back into the jar, which is what I'm going to do here, because I think you get the gist of the stenciling. And then what I can do is just gently pull off my tape, stick that over there. And then I'm going to come on over here, grab this other side. I'm always holding down a portion of that stencil just so things don't go in lots of different directions. And then gently pull this up, and you can see that beautiful sparkle and shine and the detail on here. Super simple to do. And then all I need to do is just let this dry. Now, it takes about 4 hours to dry naturally, or 10 minutes with a heat tool. Now, when you use a heat tool with it, it does tend to bubble a bit. So with really detailed stencil designs, you may find that the bubbling will make your image not quite so crisp and clean. So just factor in that 4-hour dry time when you're working with your projects, and you should have no trouble at all. And I just let all of my projects air dry, and that was absolutely fine. So you can see that beautiful color, sparkle, glisten, and shine, and of course, that gorgeous detail pattern on there. So now we've seen the basics, let's take a look at some projects. So here I've used the Sunflower Bouquet stencil with the warm gold paste, and then I die cut the piece into a circle. I was really excited about this. I was curious to see how the stenciled pieces would die cut, and it works so perfectly. So of course, make sure that this is thoroughly dry, and then pop your die right in place, secure it down with a little bit of that hunky-dory low tack tape, and send it through your die cutting machine, and you will have a piece that works beautifully as a card focal or an accent piece as well. So for the front of my card, I'm using the Tulips and Butterflies pattern paper, and I'm using them for all the projects in today's webisode. I also have a strip of texture paste cardstock, I think you can see on here, which I've just brayered with some of the warm gold. So why don't we take a look at that technique? This is a really nice, easy way to use your texture pastes, maybe in a slightly different way. So I'm going to take, this is the sea green, and I'm working on just a piece of regular white cardstock. Again, just take my palette knife and scoop some of the texture paste out. And I'm going to kind of spread this around on my piece here. Scrape that off, and I'm going to make sure grab a baby wipe and just clean that off while I've got it in hand. And then what I'm going to do is take my brayer and just sort of smooth out and move around that texture paste. And I can have a nice thin layer, or I can add more to it if I want to, but you can see just how beautifully that color sparkles on here. And then just let that dry, and you can use this for lots of different things. Backgrounds, I cut mine into a strip with my paper trimmer, but of course, keep in mind you can also do some die cutting with it too. So lots of fun things you can do, either stenciling or not stenciling. Okay, now I've got some ribbon on here and a few mermaid sparklets just to add a little bit of bling. And I've got a fun, colorful, and dimensional card front. Now for the card inside, I've kept things pretty simple with more pattern paper and a greeting from the Good Times Dazzles set, and that's what I've also used here for my hello. Okay, now you can use just one color of your texture paste. You can also combine your colors together. So let me pull out some supplies here and the card I want to show you. So for this card here, I've used the Clematis Burst stencil and a combination of antique rose and silver moon pastes. So let me slide in my stencil, again already tacked down with some of that low tack tape. And I'm going to grab my antique rose and this beautiful silver moon. You can see these two colors together are just going to be gorgeous. So I'll open up those jars and have them ready to go. And I'm going to, once again, use that palette knife. I'm going to scoop out a little bit of one color, and same as we saw before, just kind of spread this on one area and then on another area over here. As much or as little of that area as I want to cover. And making sure to clean off my palette knife in between colors. Then I'm going to come over and get some of this gorgeous, ooh, look at that. So beautiful. Gorgeous, gorgeous color. And this is the antique rose. Okay, and Then I can start to sort of work those colors together a little bit. So I can have them as blended as I want them to be, or can keep some areas a little bit separate. And then let's see, I pop the lids on really quickly, grab my stencil pal, and once again, only in one direction, you're just gently pulling with that stencil pal. Of course, I've got some more color on here. Scoop that off and add this in some other places if I want to. And once again, I'm just going to run this across here to make sure I've got everything smoothly applied. And sort of scoot everything over here. And once again, pull off my stencil tape. I always find that it works better to work on a slightly larger piece of cardstock so that you have room for that tape and any sort of wayward bits of your texture medium to go. Okay, and then I'm going to lift this up and take a look at that. So pretty. The color and the shine and the shimmer on here. Absolutely love that. And of course you can combine two colors. You can combine more colors if you want to. Alrighty, so back to our card. You can see here I've used more of that patterned paper, and I've got some matching cardstock on here too, plus more of the Good Times Dazzles. Now I've also inked the edges of my paper, and for that I am using the metallic silver pigment ink pad from Crafter's Companion, and this works really nicely to complement the texture paste. So it gives a little bit of metallic shine, but it doesn't compete with the shimmer and sparkle here. It's just a really nice color combination. Then for the card inside, I have another Dazzle greeting on here and a bit more of that brayered cardstock and of course our patterned paper. All right, I have another technique to show you that's really easy to do called reverse stenciling. So I'm going to grab a few more supplies and we can take a look at that. Here you can see the dancing dandelion stencil used on the front of this card. It's a really soft and subtle effect. You'll notice that I have the reverse of the stencil design. So if I were to stencil my texture paste through the stencil like you normally would, I would have the color in these open areas. But you can see on here that my color is actually on the dandelions themselves. Super easy to do and a really versatile technique for any of your stencils. So let's take a look at how to do this. I'll set aside my card and I'm going to bring in a few pieces of scrap paper here. I'll pop this on top. You can see it's a well-used stencil already. And then I'm going to have a couple of things on hand. First, my texture paste, and I'll be working with the beautiful blue here that I've got. I also need to have my brayer. I've got that on hand. My palette knife, of course, and then another tool, which is my water mister. Now I'm working onto my craft mat because I'm going to use this as my palette. Of course, the other thing I want to have on hand is the cardstock where I want to transfer my design onto, but I've got that sort of set off to the side here. So let's take a little bit of this blue. I'm going to scoop this out with my palette knife and just kind of spread this out onto my craft mat. You don't need a whole lot, so you can always add more if you need more, but don't need a whole bunch for this technique. Okay, I'm going to kind of spread this out again with my palette knife, and then I'm going to grab my brayer, run this through here, and then run it onto my stencil. Now, I will be going through the stencil to some effect, of course, but what I really want is to get as much of that texture medium on the plastic part of the stencil rather than through the stencil design. Okay, so rolling this on here on all the edges, and so I'm going to set aside my stencil and kind of clean this up just a little bit. Now this is still wet, but I want to make it even wetter. So what I'm going to do is mist this a little bit with some water. Don't need to flood it, but just mist it gently. Let me grab another piece of scrap paper here, pop this on underneath, and then I'm going to set this down. I'm going to grab my piece of cardstock and right away press this on top. And I'm going to hold it down and kind of burnish it with my hands. Make sure that I'm getting all of the areas touching really nicely, nice and even. Hold down one part of that cardstock while you smooth with the other. And then gently lift and remove your stencil. And you will have your reverse stencil design on there. It gives a really kind of misty effect. I think it is just beautiful. And again, this will work with any of your stencil designs. So that reverse stenciling technique is a great handy one to have in your back pocket when you're working with any kind of texture medium or ink pads or paints as well. So keep that in mind. Alrighty. Now for my card, I've got this reverse stencil design on here, again using some of that beautiful pattern paper. I've accented the dandelions with some of those mermaid sparklets, and I've got another dazzle on here that just seemed to work perfectly. And of course the metallic silver pigment ink on the paper edges coordinates really beautifully as well. Then for the card inside, I have a coordinating dazzle message paper, some of that pattern paper, and a brayered border on here too. All right, I have one more technique to show you, and this one involves embossing powder. So here I have a combination of techniques. I've reverse stenciled the luscious lilies using antique rose. Then as soon as I lifted my stencil, I added a little silver embossing powder. And I'm using silver tinsel from the Stampendous Encrusted Jewel Kit. So I have everything on hand. I've got my embossing powder, my heat tool. I'm also going to have on hand a piece of black cardstock. Now, I really encourage you when you're playing with your texture pastes and your stencils, have a go not only with the kind of classic white and off-white color cardstock, but try some darker colors as well, maybe black or navy, dark brown. Craft cardstock would also be really pretty too. Alrighty, let's take a look at the technique. I've got my stencil here on my scrap paper, and I'll grab a little bit of this beautiful antique rose, and same process as before. I'm just going to decant a bit of this onto my craft mat, and then I'll brayer out this color here and apply it same way as before right onto my stencil. So I'm trying to get as much of this color onto the stencil as possible. Beautiful, beautiful color. Okay, and once again, I'll kind of clean this up here. And then, I can even get a bit of a pattern on here. Then I'm going to mist this with my water, not flooding it, just a little bit. And set that aside, and I'll pop this back down. And now I'm going to take my black cardstock and press this right on here. Smooth it down really well. Make sure that I'm making contact with all areas of that stencil. And then I'm going to lift this off. And you can see that beautiful design on there. Now, I'm going to move this aside, but I am going to bring in a piece of folded scrap paper. Open this up. Now, I'm working while this is still wet, and I'm going to take a bit of my embossing powder, and I'm just going to sprinkle it in some areas. Now, you can coat the entire thing if you want, but I kind of like having a bit of a variegated effect. And then tap off the excess there. Let's see, maybe I'll add a little bit more over here. And then I can funnel my embossing powder back into my little jar here. Make sure that the lid is on here securely. And then I'm going to heat set this and we'll take a look, okay? So hang in there with me for a second while I heat set this and we'll see how this turns out. Alrighty, I think this is pretty much all heat set on here. And there you go. You've got, again, a variegated effect. And you've got some sparkle and some dimension on here. Now, a couple of things just to mention. I said way back in the beginning that using a heat tool can cause the texture paste to bubble. And that's why I did this with the reverse stenciling technique rather than using it right onto a traditionally stenciled piece. I think that would be a little bit too much texture paste on that and might create some bubbling effect on there. So this still allows the design to be clear and detailed, but still gives a bit of sparkle on there. And then for the rest of our card, again, I've got some of that beautiful pattern paper. I've got another dazzle with a scalloped square die cut and a little bit of jute twine kind of clustered behind here. Then for the card inside, super simple, more gorgeous pattern paper and another dazzle sentiment on here. And this is our last card project for today. So let me take out a few more of these other projects and we can still have a look at these. And all the way from our simple stenciling to reverse stenciling and even more. Thank you so much to our friends at Creative Expressions for always creating such inspiring products. Thanks also to Jamie Rogers for his beautiful stencil designs. And a big thank you to you for joining me today. We're so very glad that you're here and we're really happy you're part of the Paper Wishes family. Please feel free to leave a comment. We love to hear what you think. Each item can be purchased separately and you can see them below. However, we've also bundled them into a creative money saver just for you. Be sure to see the money saver on the right side of your screen at paperwishes.com. And if you're watching us on YouTube, just have a look in the description box below this video. You'll find a link that will take you to our Paper Wishes webisodes page and you can see everything I just mentioned. If you enjoyed our video today, we'd really appreciate a thumbs up. It helps people find our channel. And don't forget to subscribe. We create 3 to 5 videos each week, so there's always something fun to inspire your creative spirit.